Okay. 5. The transformation of the copying clerk. The watchman, you remember him, happened to remember those galoshes he had found, and that he must have been wearing them when he took his body to the hospital. He came by for them, and as neither the lieutenant nor anyone else in East Street laid claim to them, he turned them in at the police station. "They look exactly like my own galoshes," one of the copying clerks at the police station said, as he set the ownerless galoshes down beside his own. Not even a shoemaker could tell one pair from the other. "Mr. Copying Clerk," said a policeman who brought him some papers. The clerk turned around to talk with the policeman, and when he came back to the galoshes, he was uncertain whether the pair on the right or the pair on the left belonged to him. The wet ones must be mine, he thought, but he was mistaken, for they were the Galoshes of Fortune. The police make their little mistakes too. So he pulled them on, pocketed some papers, and tucked some manuscripts under his arm to read an abstract when he got home. But as this happened to be Sunday morning and the weather was fine, he thought, "A walk to Fredericksburg will be good for me," and off he went. A quieter, more dependable fellow than this young man you seldom see. Let him take his little walk, by all means. It will do him a world of good after so much sitting. At first he strode along without a wish in his head, so there was no occasion for the galoshes to show their magic power. On the avenue he met an acquaintance of his, a young poet who said he was setting out tomorrow on a summer excursion. "What, off again so soon?" said the clerk. "What a free and happy fellow you are. You can fly away wherever you like, while the rest of us are chained by the leg." "Chained only to a breadfruit tree," the poet reminded him. "You don't have a worry along from day to day. And when you get old, they will give you a pension." "You are better off just the same," the clerk said. "How agreeable it must be to sit and write poetry. Everyone pays you compliments, and you are your own master. Ah, you should see what it's like to devote your life to the trivial details of the courts." The poet shook his head, and the clerk shook his too. Each held to his own conviction, and they parted company. "They are a queer race, these poets," thought the clerk. "I should like to try my hand at their trade. To turn poet myself. I'm sure I would never write such melancholy stuff as most of them do. What a splendid spring day this is, a day fit for a poet. The air is so unusually clear, the clouds so lovely, and the green grass so fragrant. For many a year I have not felt as I feel just now." Already you could tell that he had turned poet. Not that there was anything you could put your finger on, for it is foolish to suppose that a poet differs greatly from other people, some of whom are far more poetic by nature than many a great and accepted poet. The chief difference is that a poet has a better memory for things of the spirit. He can hold fast to an emotion and an idea until they are firmly and clearly embodied in words, which is something that others cannot do. But for a matter-of-fact person to think in terms of poetry is noticeable enough, and it is this transformation that we can see in the clerk. "What a glorious fragrance there is in the air," he said. "It reminds me of my Aunt Lone's violets. Ah me, I haven't thought of them since I was a little boy. The dear old girl. She used to live over there behind the exchange. She always had a spray or a few green shoots in water, no matter how severe the winter was. I'd smell those violet holes. What a view that was. Ships frozen tight in the canal, deserted by their crews, and a shrieking crow, the only living creature aboard them. But when the springtime breezes blew, the scene turned lively again. There were shouts and laughter as the ice was sawed away, freshly tarred and rigged. The ships sailed off for distant lands. I stayed here, and I must forever stay here, sitting in the police office where others come for their passports to foreign countries. Yes, that's my lot. Oh yes, he said, and heaved a sigh. Then he stopped abruptly. Great heavens, what's come over me? I never thought or felt like this before. It must be the spring air. It is as frightening as it is pleasant. He fumbled among the papers in his pockets. These will give me something else to think about, he said as he glanced at the first page. Lady Sigbirth, Brith, an original tragedy in 5 acts, he read. Why, what's this? It's in my own handwriting, too. Have I written a tragedy? The Intrigue on the Ramparts or the Great Fast Day of Vaudeville. Where did that come from? Someone must have slipped it in my pocket, and here's a letter. It was from the board of directors of the theater, who rejected his plays, and the letter was anything but politely phrased. "Hem hem," said the copying clerk as he sat down on a bench. His thoughts were lively, and his heart sensitive. He plucked a flower at random, an ordinary little daisy. What the professor of botany requires several lectures to explain to us, this flower told in a moment. It told of the mystery of birth and the power of the sunlight that opened those delicate leaves and gave them their fragrance. This made him think of the battle of life, which arouses emotions within us in similar fashion. Air and light are the flower's lovers, but light is her favorite. Toward it the flower is ever turning, and only when the light is gone does she fold her petals and sleep in the air's embrace. "It is the light that makes me lovely," the flower said. "But," the poet's voice whispered, "the air enables you to breathe." Not far away, a boy was splashing in a muddy ditch with his stick. As the water flew up among the green branches, the clerk thought of the innumerable microscopic creatures in the splashing drops. For them to be splashed so high was as if he were to be tossed up into the clouds. As the clerk thought of these things and of the great change that had come over him, he smiled and said, "I must be asleep and dreaming. It's marvelous to be able to dream so naturally and yet to know all along that this is a dream. I hope I can recall every bit of it tomorrow. When I wake up, I seem to feel unusually exhilarated. How clearly I understand things and how wide awake I feel. But I know that if I recall my dream, it will only be a lot of nonsense, as has happened to me so often before. All those brilliant and clever remarks one makes and one hears in his dreams are like the gold pieces that goblins store around. When one gets them, they are rich and shining, but seen in the daylight, they are nothing but rocks and dry leaves. Ah me," he sighed, as he sadly watched the singing birds flit merrily from branch to branch. "They are so much better off than I. Flying is a noble art, and lucky is he who was born with wings. Yes, I could change into anything I like. I would turn into a little lark." In a trice, his coat-tails and sleeves grew together as wings, his clothes turned into feathers, and his galoshes became claws. He noticed the change clearly and laughed to himself. "Now," he said, "I know I am dreaming, but I never had a dream as silly as this one." Up he flew and sang among the branches, but there was no poetry in his song, for he was no longer a poet. Like anyone who does a thorough job of it, the galoshes could only do one thing at a time. When he wished to be a poet he became. Then he wanted to be a little bird, and in becoming one he lost his previous character. "This is most amusing," he said. "In the daytime I sit in the police office surrounded by the most matter-of-fact legal papers, but by night I can dream that I'm a lark flying about in the Fredericksburg garden. What fine material this would make for a popular comedy." He flew down on the grass, twisting and turning his head and pecking at the waving grass blades. In proportion to his own size, they seemed as large as the palm branches in North Africa, but this lasted only a moment. Then everything turned black, and it seemed as if some huge object had dropped over him. This was a big cap that a boy from Nybotter had thrown over the bird. A hand was thrust in. It laid hold of the copying clerk by his back and wings so tightly that it made him shriek. In his terror he called out, "You impudent scoundrel! I am the copying clerk at the police office." But this sounded like beep beep to the boy, who thumped the bird on its beak and walked off with it. On the avenue, this boy met with two other schoolboys. Socially, they were of the upper classes, though properly ranked according to their merit. They were in the lowest class at school. They bought the bird for 8 pennies, and in their hands the clerk came back to Copenhagen to a family who lived in Gothard Street. "It's a good thing I'm only dreaming this," said the clerk, "or I'd be furious. First I was a poet, and now I'm a lark. It must have been my poetic temperament that turned me into this little creature. It is a very sad state of affairs, especially when one falls into the hands of a couple of boys, but I wonder how it will all turn out." The boys carried him into a luxurious appointed room where a stout, affable lady received them. She was not at all pleased with their common little field bird, as she called the lark, but she said that for one day only they could keep it in the empty cage near the window. "Perhaps Polly will like it," she said, and smiled at the large parrot that swung proudly to and fro on the ring in his ornate brass cage. "It's Polly's birthday," she said, like a simpleton. "The little field bird wants to congratulate him." Polly did not say a word. As proudly he swung back and forth, but a pretty canary bird who had been brought here last summer from his warm, sweet-scented homeland began to sing at the top of his voice. "Baller," the lady said, and threw a white handkerchief over the cage. "Peep, peep, what a terrible snowstorm," the canary sighed. and with that sigh he kept quiet. The clerk, or as the lady called him, the field bird, was put in the cage next to the canaries and not far from the parrots. The only human words that the parrot could say, and which at times sounded quite comical, were, "Come now, let us be men." All the rest of his chatter made as little sense as the twittering of the canary. However, the clerk, who was now a bird himself, understood his companions perfectly. "I used to fly beneath the green palms and flowering almond trees," the canary bird sang. "With my brothers and sisters I flew above beautiful flowers and over the smooth sea where the plants that grow under the water waved up at us. We used to meet many brilliant parrots who told the funniest stories, long ones, and so many." "Those were wild parrots," said Polly, "birds without any education. Come now, let us be men. Why don't you laugh?" "If the lady and all her guests laugh at my remarks, so should you. To lack a sense of humor is a very bad thing. Come now, let us be men. Do you remember the pretty girls who danced in the tents spread beneath those flowering trees?" the canary sang. "Do you remember those delicious sweet fruits and the cool juice of the wild plants?" "Why, yes," said the parrot, "but I am much better off here, where I get the best of food and intimate treatment. I know that I am a clever bird, and that's enough for me. Come now, let us be men. You have the soul of a poet, as they call it, and I have sound knowledge and wit. You have genius, but no discretion. You burst into that shrill, spontaneous song of yours. That's why people cover you up. They don't ever treat me like that. No, I have cost them a lot, and what is more imposing, my beak and my wits are sharp. Come now, let us be men." "Oh, my warm, flowery homeland," said the canary, "I shall sing of your deep green trees and your quiet inlets where the down-hanging branches kiss the clear mirror of the waters. I shall sing of my resplendent brothers and sisters who rejoice as they hover over the cups of water in the cactus plant that thrive in the desert." "Kindly stop your whimpering tunes," the parrot said. "Sing something to make us laugh. Laughter is a sign of the loftiest intellectual development. Can a dog or a horse laugh? No. They can cry, but as for laughter, that is given to mankind alone. Ho, ho, ho," the parrot chuckled and added this, "Come now, let us be men." "You little gray bird of Denmark," the canary said to the lark, "have they made you a prisoner too? Although it must be very cold in your woods. You have your freedom there. Fly away. They have forgotten to close your cage. The door of the top is open. Fly, fly." Without pausing to think, the clerk did as he was told. In a jiffy he was out of the cage, but just as he escaped from his prison, the half-open door leading into the next room began to creak. Stealthily, the green shining eyes, the house cat pounced in and gave chase to him. The canary fluttered in his cage. The parrot flapped his wings and called out, "Come now, let us be men." The dreadfully frightened clerk flew out of the window and away over the streets and houses until at last he had to stop to rest. The house across the street looked familiar. He flew in through one of its open windows. As he perched on the table, he found that he was in his own room. "Come now, let us be men," he blurted out, in spontaneous mockery of the parrot. Instantly he resumed the body of the copying clerk, who sat there perched on the table. "How in the name of heaven," he said, "do I happen to be sleeping here? What a disturbing dream I've had, all nonsense from the beginning to end."